Hello everyone, Benji-Sales here, and today I wanted to take a minute to talk about Ubisoft and why I believe that they are the best run Western AAA publisher in the entire video game industry. Now, I know that Ubisoft can be a bit of a contentious topic in many gamer circles, but the reality is, regardless of how you may feel about some of their games or some of their business practices, this is a company that delivers exceptional sales on their titles year in, year out across many different IP in different genre, and what that means is they have a brilliant understanding of the overall mainstream gamer market, right? So while maybe some people on forums, or even on YouTube might not be their biggest fans, the reality is Ubisoft is one of the best publishers in the entire world. Now, they just had their biggest year ever and just released their fiscal year results. So I thought, what better time would there be, to kind of dive in, take a look at some of the moves they've made and the things they've done to put themselves in just a simply incredible position. Let's dive in. So first, let's talk about Rainbow Six Siege. And there's a reason that I'm bringing this up as my very first talking point. And that's because I think this is a microcosm example of why Ubisoft is so insanely successful. So let's break it down. When this game first launched, right, it had fairly soft sales. Now, it had a pretty decent debut in the US, but in many other markets, outside of the US, it was very soft at launch. Right? And the game wasn't a massive hit right off the bat. But what have we seen? This game has now crossed over 45 million players worldwide and has grossed more than $1 billion in revenue. In my opinion, this is the biggest hit / turnaround of this entire generation. Okay, of the entire generation of games and consoles that have been released, this is just a staggering long performance. It's still charting in NPDs, right? Still, and this game came out years ago. So how did this all happen? How did a game that started off not a smashing success become one of the biggest games in the entire industry? Well, it's simple, and it's this right here. Ubisoft never gave up on it, and they put so much long-term support in this game. It is unbelievable, okay? So this was really Ubisoft's first attempt at creating a game as a service. Now, I know that word and that name has a lot of negative connotations with it, and for good reason, right? There's a lot of reasons a lot of gamers feel negative towards games as a service, but Rainbow Six Siege is a perfect example of that done right, okay? So Ubisoft just kept putting more and more resources into this game. They didn't let it die, right? They didn't say, hey, the game wasn't a juggernaut right off the bat, we're just going to abandon it and move on to something else. No, they kept releasing new operators, new maps, updates just to the game itself, the core foundation, constantly innovating and evolving the product. So word of mouth just grew and grew, because while it was a small community at first that really enjoyed the game, despite, let's be honest, early on it had a lot of issues, a lot of bugs, but a lot of people really loved that core gameplay and the core idea behind it. And as Ubisoft added content and as they kept, changing the game based off player feedback, those players were then communicating to their friends, hey, this game has gotten incredible. I've heard so many stories personally of gamers that, maybe picked this game up in the first month, gave up on it, and then repurchased, or, if they had it digitally or whatever, reinstalled it, months to years later after all of that feedback, and really loved it. So this is an example right here of Ubisoft proving what they are so good at, and that is reading the market, right? And not just abandoning their IP. They really believe in them. They really believe in, they're capable of making their franchises into absolute juggernauts, and Rainbow Six Siege is a brilliant example of that. All right, the next point I want to hit on is how Ubisoft has a huge portfolio of IP across different genre. They diversified their franchises to a massive extent. And while some people, do note that there is a Ubisoft formula in their games, which is true to a degree, absolutely there is a style that does kind of overlap across some of their franchises. The fact is, I'm not sure if there's any publisher in the world with as broad of a range of types of games that they release. We've got games like Watch Dogs that are these open world, modern setting, big city, third person action games. We've got stuff like The Crew 2, which is a racing game. Stuff like Mario and Rabbids and Rayman that are family friendly titles, and hardcore first person shooters like Far Cry. It's just a huge swath of different franchises, different IP, and they can rely on that. They can release multiple games per year in completely different settings, different feels, and they have a game almost for everyone. And I feel that's really true. Even a lot of people that heavily dislike Ubisoft, there's at least that one franchise or that one game from them they really like. Whether it's a classic game that we haven't seen in a while, like a Prince of Persia or a Splinter Cell, or whether it's something more modern. They just have so many IP in so many genres, and it really helps them they don't rely on just one big game, right? That's one thing that worries me about companies like, let's say, Activision, for example. Call of Duty is consistently a massive, massive franchise, year in, year out, but really, they depend on it so much. And what happens if, by some crazy reason, Call of Duty were to fall off? Now, by no means do I expect that to happen. People have been saying every year, maybe this is the year Call of Duty dies. That may never happen. Maybe the next 50 years down the line, people are still playing their annual Call of Duty. It's entirely possible. But I just mean, that does worry me about certain publishers, is that they rely so heavily on an individual game in their portfolio. And Ubisoft does not have to worry about that. They can have a game underperform, or they could have, a one or two misses, because they have so many other IP that they can foster, and they're always creating new ones as well. Alright, so let's talk about Assassin's Creed, and there's a reason I'm bringing this up, right? Not just because this is a massive franchise, but I'm bringing it up as an example of something else Ubisoft does that, some publishers are not willing to do, and that is Ubisoft is not afraid to put a game on delay or on the back burner, if it needs to be, right? We've recently seen examples of this, like, let's say, with Anthem from EA, where that game really, I understand, right? That game was in development for a very, very, very long time. So to a degree, I understand why EA put it out. But I think everyone can agree that if that game could have even gotten another 6 to 12 months in the oven, maybe not everything would have been fixed, right? Because a lot of the core issues, weren't aware of until that game went live to the public. But still, let's be honest, another 6 to 12 months could have made a massive difference in terms of that game. But Ubisoft, they are not afraid at all to delay games. We see them do it from time to time. They just recently did it with Skull and Bones, just a real quick, hey, the game, we're pushing it back. It's not going to be at E3 this year. We believe in it, but it needs more time in the cooker. And sometimes that's something you need to do, right? Sometimes you just got to take the hit and do the delay. Yes, maybe it affects your fiscal results whenever that happens, but long term, you're guaranteeing that the franchise has a better shot at being successful, right? Because if you put out that game like Anthem, for example, and consumers feel burned heavily by it, good luck getting them to buy in on a sequel, right? It's not impossible, but man, let's be honest, that name is tarnished now. Whereas something like Skull and Bones, maybe if they would have put that out, when they were originally planning, who knows? Maybe it would have been in a really rough state, and it's game over. Now, the reason I'm bringing up Assassin's Creed is because it's essentially what happened with Assassin's Creed. The franchise was on a downward trajectory, right? Each entry was selling less than the previous one. Consumers, I think, were starting to feel exhausted by one of these games every single year. So what did they do? They took a year off, gave Assassin's Creed Origins and Assassin's Creed Odyssey an extra year of development each, and wow, what a turnaround for the franchise. So Origins was up over Syndicate, the previous entry before that. They completely overhauled the way Assassin's Creed works, its gameplay. I mean, it's a radical departure from some of the old Assassin's Creed games, and consumers responded. Then, the next entry, Assassin's Creed Odyssey, evolved on those things and felt even better and was, was, nominated for many, many Game of the Year awards, and now they just announced in their fiscal year results that, for this past Q4, Odyssey sales were outpacing Origin. So we're looking at a franchise that's back on the upward trajectory. And you know what? There's no Assassin's Creed this coming year, right? It's not going to be until the year after. So again, we're getting that break. They're giving their teams time to really invest in these franchises and deliver something amazing for consumers. So, that's another strength of Ubisoft. They're willing to take risks, and they're also willing to take breaks and delay a game if it's necessary. And the last thing I want to talk about is new IP. New intellectual properties and franchises are the lifeblood of this industry. So while franchises are incredibly important, long-term franchises, Ubisoft has plenty of those as well, with like Assassin's Creed, and Far Cry, but they have put out, almost more new IP this generation than any other publisher. Games like The Division, Watch Dogs, Crew, Steep. I mean, there's numerous examples of brand new IP that they've released, and that is just, again, giving them more and more franchises to work with. Every time they release a game like this, of course, it is a huge risk. It's unfamiliar territory. You have to create a brand. So it's not necessarily as safe a bet as another Assassin's Creed. But what happens if you're successful with it, right? What happens if you do hit it out of the park? Well, you get a game like The Division 1, which had record-breaking launch sales, right? And now it's spawned a sequel, which Ubisoft did note slightly underperformed their expectations with The Division 2, but I think that game is going to have very strong legs due to fantastic word of mouth. So maybe, it was under their projections early on, which to me isn't super surprising. They probably had some huge expectations for it after how massive The Division 1 was at launch. Long term, I think that game is going to pay dividends for them. And, that's just what I mean. While many publishers just reuse the same franchises over and over again, I love seeing Ubisoft going out there, creating these new IPs, keeping this industry fresh and exciting, and always giving us, that spin. People always talk about that. What's going to be that surprise game at the Ubisoft E3 conference, right? Whenever they first debuted The Division and Watch Dogs and games like this, it was so exciting seeing something you've never seen before. And they just talked about in their fiscal year results that they're back on doing that, a huge investment in new IP as we move into the next generation of consoles. That's the best time to release new IPs. Early on in a gen, people are looking for brand new experiences, and that's the best time to do it. And, Ubisoft, again, I expect many new IP from them in the coming years. And that is going to wrap it up, everyone. That's some of my thoughts on some of the things that have made Ubisoft the best publisher in the entire world, at least in terms of Western third parties. Again, maybe they don't generate as much money as like an EA, or an Activision. If you're just an investor looking at dollar signs, maybe to you they aren't run, as well as a company like that. But me, if I'm putting my money on someone, it's going to be Ubisoft, and I think long term, if you buy in, now, or if you're not an investor, if you're just a fan, I just think that they're run so fantastically. They make so many brilliant choices, and they're just a safe bet, right? They're doing great things, and I hope you gave the video a chance. I know a lot of people really like to not say positive things about Ubisoft. I know it gets a lot of clicks and a lot of views whenever you're talking about how much you hate them and they're the worst publisher in the world and they're just out to screw you. But here's the thing, they're not just out to screw you, and they're a fantastically run business. As always, everyone, I am Benji-Sales. Follow me on Twitter if you don't already. I talk a lot about games on there, and as well as the business and the sales side of the industry. That's really my specialty. If you like the video, make sure to hit the like and subscribe button. Thank you so much for watching, everyone, and I'll see you in the next video.